The hidden cost of being too nice. Have you ever felt this? The kinder you are, the less people respect you. The more you try to keep the peace, the more they test you, use you, overlook you. You don't always have words for it, but your body knows. It feels it in the tension of staying quiet when you wanted to speak, in the frustration of seeing cold. Even manipulative people get more respect, while you, who only wanted harmony, are quietly pushed aside. This isn't just bad luck. It's not just how people are. There's a deeper truth here, one that Machiavelli saw clearly 500 years ago. It is better to be feared than loved. If you cannot be both, harsh, yes, but accurate, because the human mind doesn't honor intention. It honors posture. It respects boundaries more than kindness. Evolution wired us that way. Strength protects. Weakness attracts predators. And in the modern world, kindness without boundaries is not seen as noble. It's seen as soft. Kindness without edge isn't presence, it's exposure. And that changes starting now. The psychology of disrespect. You felt it. The more kind you are, the more people seem to test you, push you, ignore you. You're generous, empathetic, always trying to do the right thing, but somehow that earns you less respect, not more. It feels personal, but it's not. It's psychological. Kindness without strength is like bleeding in the ocean. It signals vulnerability, and eventually, the sharks smell it. This isn't about being cruel. It's about how the human brain has evolved. In psychology, it's called social signaling, the subtle cues we all pick up on. Your tone, your posture, your ability to say no, they all send a message. And people are constantly reading that message, even if they don't realize it. Why? Because we test each other. Subconsciously, we push to find limits. Not because we're evil, but because the brain needs to know, is this person strong enough to be respected? Here's the harsh truth. The mind respects. Electric fences, not welcome mats. Think about someone you deeply respect. Not fear. Respect. Chances are, it's not the person who always says yes. It's the one who holds their line. The one who doesn't explain themselves endlessly. The one who stays silent when others would beg. That's real power. Not volume. Not aggression. Presence. But many confuse kindness with approval seeking. They mistake being nice for being noble. So they smile when they want to speak. They stay when they should walk away. They give more, even when it's taken for granted. And in doing so, they train others to ignore them. Machiavelli saw it 500 years ago. People forget those who offer favors, but they never forget those who make them think twice. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. Because if your kindness has no boundaries, it becomes a signal that says, you can cross me, and I won't stop you. And that is not virtue. That is permission. So the real challenge is this. How do you stay kind without being prey? To answer that, we must go deeper into the dilemma of kindness. The kindness trap. Maybe no one ever told you this, but there's a fine line between being good and being invisible. You've always tried to do the right thing. You listen. You give. You understand. You forgive often when no apology comes. You thought kindness was enough. That if you treated people with empathy, The world would reflect that back to you. But somewhere along the way, something broke. You started feeling used, overlooked, even disrespected. And yet, you kept giving. Why? Because you've tied your identity to it. You've become dependent on being seen as the nice one. You don't just offer kindness. You depend on it being noticed. Psychology has a name for this validation dependency. The belief that your worth comes from how others react to you. So you bend. You soften your voice. You over-explain. You silence your own needs just to preserve an image. This is what I call emotional outsourcing. You hand your self-worth over to other people and hope they manage it well. But they never do. Because the more you train others to believe you'll never walk away, the more they learn they don't have to show up. Kindness, when rooted in fear, becomes a trap. You don't set boundaries because you're afraid they'll leave. You don't speak up because you fear being called difficult. You smile to avoid conflict, even as something inside you quietly breaks. Here's the harsh truth. There is no real kindness without strength. Kindness without discernment is not compassion. It's self-betrayal. And the more you self-abandon, the more others follow your lead. Because the world doesn't reward niceness. It rewards presence, conviction, boundaries. And yes, sometimes, it rewards the courage to walk away. Sunu. The answer is not to become hard. It's to become whole. To stop needing applause for being good and start becoming someone who respects themselves with or without validation. So how do you break free from this cycle without becoming cold or cynical? For that we turn to Machiavelli, not as a villain, but as a brutal realist who understood one timeless truth: respected people are not always loved, but they are never ignored. Machiavelli's real warning. When most people hear the name Machiavelli, they picture a ruthless manipulator. Cold, calculating, dangerous. But that's a shallow interpretation. Niccolò Machiavelli wasn't evil. He was a realist, one of the most brutally honest observers of human nature the world has ever known. He wrote The Prince not to glorify cruelty, but to describe the world as it is not as we wish it to be. And the world he saw was ruled by interest, not morality, by perception, not intention. He had lived through political betrayal, corrupt alliances, civil unrest. He watched as well-meaning leaders fell, not because they lacked virtue, but because they lacked strategy. His warning was clear. People forget favors, but they never forget the one who makes them think twice. What does that mean? It means that love is beautiful but unstable. People love you when it suits them, when you meet their needs, when you say yes. But that love, it evaporates at the first sign of conflict, at the first boundary you dare to draw. Fear, on the other hand, when used wisely, creates structure. It sets the tone. It becomes a boundary that says, this far, no further. Think of it this way. Love is an open door. Fear is a locked gate. And while people appreciate an open door, they're far more careful around a gate. Machiavelli wasn't telling you to become cruel. He was telling you to stop being naive. He was pointing to a principle of power that still holds true if you want to be respected. You must inspire caution, not just comfort. Because when people don't fear disappointing you, they eventually do. This applies to more than rulers. It applies to friendships, work relationships, family dynamics, anywhere people test what they can get away with. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to control anyone, but you do need to control the message your presence sends. Is it one of softness without edge, or calm with consequence? Machiavelli's real message was not cruelty. It was clarity. That no one respects what they don't believe, can say no. Now that you see what he meant, how do you apply this wisdom in everyday life without becoming a tyrant? That's exactly what we'll explore next. How to be feared without being hated. There's a fine line between being feared and being hated, and if you don't know how to walk it, you'll fall into one of two traps: passive submission that invites disrespect, or aggressive dominance that breeds quiet rebellion. True authority doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't need to prove anything. Because real power isn't loud, it's felt. Psychologists call this status equilibrium. The more effortlessly you embody control, the less you need to explain yourself. The moment you start over-explaining, over-justifying, over-defending, you signal insecurity. And insecurity is the gateway to disrespect. Let's be clear. Being feared doesn't mean being cruel. It means being unpredictable to those who would test you. It means your silence carries weight. Your absence has consequence. And your no is final without drama, without debate. It's not loud power. It's gravity. And gravity doesn't beg to be noticed. It's not about making others feel small. It's about making your boundaries impossible to ignore. Think of someone who commands a room just by walking into it. They don't demand attention. They absorb it. That's the kind of presence you build, not through force, but through congruence. When your body language, tone, and boundaries all align, you stop being someone others can manipulate. You become someone they must reckon with. Now, here's the paradox. When you embody quiet strength, you will trigger some people. They may call you cold, detached, arrogant, but that's not about you. That's about them losing control over you. Still, there's a danger, because if fear is all you inspire, you'll eventually be resented, and resentment turns into sabotage. That's why the art is in the balance. You must be firm, but not rigid, direct, but not cruel. You want others to think twice before testing you, but not to walk on eggshells around you. Set clear expectations. State your limits once, then enforce them quietly. Respect builds. When people know that crossing the line won't trigger chaos, it will trigger clarity. You don't need to fight every battle. You just need to make it clear you're not a battlefield to begin with. Because those who master their emotions, those who can say no with calm, hold their silence with strength, and walk away without apology, are the ones who gain a reputation that does all the talking for them. So what if you've done all of this, and people still cross the line? Then it's no longer a question of tactics. It's a question of identity. And that's where we go next. Where respect is born the inner wall. If you've tried to assert yourself, but still feel disrespected, the issue may not be in what you do, but in what you believe you're allowed to do. Because no boundary works on the outside if it's broken on the inside. This is where we confront a deeper truth. Many people were conditioned, often silently, to please in order to survive. As children, they learned that approval came with obedience, that love had strings, that disagreeing meant rejection, that saying no meant being punished, not just emotionally, but existentially. So what happens? We grow up in adult bodies, but our nervous system is still obeying the child's script. Be agreeable to be safe. Smile to be accepted. Give more, or you'll lose everything. This is emotional slavery. You abandon yourself to keep others comfortable. You trade authenticity for approval, and the cost is your identity. Schema therapy calls these core beliefs the unconscious templates written in childhood that shape how you interpret conflict, power, and worth. One of the most toxic is this: if I protect myself, I'll lose love. So you stay silent. You rationalize disrespect. You let others cross your boundaries, not because you're weak, but because your inner map tells you that speaking up equals danger. This is self-abandonment, and it's invisible until it's not. Until you realize that the person disrespecting you the most is the one in the mirror every time you say yes, when everything in you screams no. So, how do you change that? You start by identifying the pattern. Who are you afraid to upset? Whose approval still controls you? What version of yourself are you clinging to just to feel safe? Because here's the truth: respect is not requested. It's broadcast. It's in the way you sit, the way you say no, the way you stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. Real self-respect isn't loud. It's quiet. It's steady. And it builds an inner wall, one that others can feel, even if they never see it. Yes, you will lose some people along the way, but losing those who only valued your silence isn't loss. It's liberation. Because until you stop abandoning yourself, you will keep attracting those who expect you to. And that brings us here. Real change begins when you stop obeying invisible scripts and start writing your own. Now let's talk about how to do exactly that. The price of awakening. Here's what no one tells you at the beginning of your transformation. When you start asserting real boundaries, you will lose people. Not because you've changed too much, but because you've stopped playing the role they were comfortable with. People who benefited from your silence will call your clarity aggression. Those who depended on your self-sacrifice will say you've become selfish. Those who controlled you through guilt will now call you cold. And it hurts. Because these aren't always strangers. They can be friends, family, even people you once loved. So when the shift begins, you'll be tempted to back down, to soften your stance just enough to be liked again. Don't. That tension you feel, that discomfort is not a sign something's wrong. It's the evidence that your nervous system is recalibrating. You are detoxing the emotional residue of being too available, too agreeable, too afraid to disappoint. And yes, losing people is painful, but it's not destruction. It's filtration. You're not being abandoned. You're being refined. The wrong people are falling away, so the right ones can finally see you not for what you give, but for who you truly are. This is the emotional cost of awakening. The grief of letting go of who you had to be in order to survive, and the birth of who you were always meant to become. You'll notice something else, too. Your circle gets smaller, but your life gets lighter. You stop explaining yourself to people who only listen to respond. You stop proving your worth to those who never intended to respect it. And in that space between the loss and the liberation, you meet someone new. You. Not the people pleaser, not the appeaser, but the one who knows their value without needing to announce it. That is the real reward. Not applause, not approval. That's not peace. That's alignment, rooted, earned, and unshakable. So when it starts to feel lonely, when the voices of guilt and fear get louder, remember this: discomfort is not your enemy. It's your compass. It means you're no longer performing for acceptance. You're building from truth. Now the question is, how do you keep this strength without turning bitter? That's the final mastery. And that's where we're going next. The final balance: power. With soul, there's a difference between being strong and being hardened, between defending your peace and building walls no one can enter. The highest form of power is not domination. It's containment. Think of a stoic, calm in the storm, clear in chaos, unshaken, not because they don't feel, but because their emotions do not dictate their posture. They don't collapse when challenged. They don't explode when disrespected. They hold the line internally and externally. This is not repression. This is discipline. A decision to respond, not react. To influence without needing control. To lead without the need to be liked. Because real authority doesn't come from volume. It comes from presence. Be like a mountain unmoved, but shaping the weather around it. You don't need to shout your values. You need to embody them. You don't need to demand respect. You need to radiate it. When you do, people adjust themselves around you without you lifting a finger. Because stillness, when rooted in clarity, commands more gravity than noise ever could. This is what emotional maturity looks like. Not perfection, not apathy, but precision. You feel everything, but you choose what to magnify. You observe your instincts, but you don't worship them. And above all, you refuse to let your pain turn into poison. That is the final balance. Power with soul. Strength without cruelty. Clarity without coldness. You can say no without guilt. You can walk away without rage. You can love without losing yourself. Because you are no longer trying to be invulnerable, you are becoming anchored. And those who are anchored don't need to dominate. They simply endure. So now comes the real moment of power. Application. You know the principles. You've seen the patterns. You understand the cost of silence and the reward of self-respect. What will you do with it? That's the final test. Because growth is not something you understand. It's something you become. So what now? Knowing is not enough. You must. No more begging. No more bleeding. No one gives you what you don't demand. You've spent enough time hoping that people would just understand. That kindness would be recognized. That loyalty would be returned. That if you just gave enough, stayed quiet enough, smiled long enough, they'd see your worth. But respect is not given to those who wait. It's reserved for those who claim it. You don't need to change your heart. You just need to sharpen your edge. You can still be kind, but let that kindness walk beside a spine of steel. You can still be generous, but only with those who earn it. You can still forgive, but never forget who showed you their pattern. This is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to the version of you that never needed to beg, bleed, or shrink to be loved. So if this message hit you, if something clicked deep inside, seal it. Make it real. Write in the comments below. From today, I choose respect over approval. Say it. Mean it. Live it. And I'll see you in the next chapter, where we stop being tolerated and start being remembered.